Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Close Quarter on the Insurer TV. We're joined by Joseph Blanco, President of Crawford Company, to talk about social inflation. So thanks for joining us, Joseph, and can I say what a pleasure it is to be doing this on the ground in Atlanta rather than over a Zoom call.
David, great to be with you today, and I appreciate you coming up here to do it in person.
So Joe, the issue of social inflation is a perennial one for the insurance industry, and it contributes to reserving inadequacy and of course underpricing of policies. Why is it so challenging for insurers to address?
Well, you're right. It's a perennial issue that has been out there, and it's not new for any of us. It's really in the 1980s we saw this. We saw it again in the mid-90s. We saw it in the early 2000s. I think what's new right now is the pace of that change. And I think whether it's driven by social inflation, third-party litigation funding, but the environment right now is really increasing that pace of change. And when you add that to these emerging claims that are out there, whether it be post-traumatic distress, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or neurological functional disorder, and similar type mental health related claims, these are all working to really increase the rate of social inflation.
Got it. And what would you say the key factors are that are influencing the rate of social inflation? And have some of those drivers become more prominent in recent years?
Well, I do think that they've become more prominent in recent years, and it's been from drawn out legal proceedings, which of course just the timing of legal proceedings increases the cost of claims. You have that along with runaway jury verdicts that are out there. You have emerging risk that are out there, whether they be climate change or the global pandemic itself. And I think you add that to the dynamics of third-party litigation funding that is out there, and this general mistrust of institutions that is out there. All of those things are combining to really create an environment where social inflation is just running rampant.
We hope at least we're through the worst of the pandemic, and we're sat here in person doing this interview. But do you think we're likely to see the fallout of COVID-19 amplify some of these trends?
So I do think that the COVID-19 dynamic is going to amplify some of the trends. But first, I think these trends were moving in this direction before the pandemic. And in many ways, the pandemic slowed down the pace of some of the trends. What's happening right now, though, at the same time, is obviously with the pandemic lifting its barrier for some of those repressing some of those factors is now lifting, and it's being exacerbated by the social media and kind of the dynamic with which information is moving around the country and around the world. And so at the same time, you're going to start seeing this backlog of cases move through the courts. And so we still think we probably have about another year and a half to really catch back up to speed. And so that dynamic is going to be playing out there. And at the same time, social media is just going to be fueling this dynamic. I think at the same time, and I know it's a bad thing to mention the recession word, but there are recessionary pressures that we're starting to see across the globe. And with recessionary pressures come fraud activity. And with fraud activity, which is closely related to social inflation, I think you're just going to see more and more of this.
And are there any recent shifts in terms of litigation activity that are really having a more pronounced effect on social inflation, would you say?
So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the whole big jury verdicts is having an impact on this. Folks see those jury verdicts, and I think that does two things. It creates unrealistic expectations part of some claimants, but it's also just fueling the industry at large. And so people are chasing those huge verdicts that are out there. And I think that as that happens and as that plays out, you're going to see more and more pressure in this area. But almost, it's not just the litigation and the timing of litigation, the cost of litigation that is going on, but you're starting to see things move even more so from just litigation to pre-litigation. What I mean by that, when I was in law school now a couple of decades ago, we really talked about using fear and anger and how that was being used in closing arguments to try to stoke jury verdicts. What's happening now is that fear and anger is now escaped the courtroom, if you will, and is really part of the advertising that is going on, or that pre-litigation environment. And that advertising and pre-litigation environment is really creating these social inflation drivers that are out there. And I don't see that trend being arrested anytime soon.
Sure, and I think it's probably fair to say that So far, at least, social inflation has been kind of viewed as a largely US phenomenon. But are you starting to see it having a greater influence in other jurisdictions?
So I think the good news for those around the world are there are certain dynamics that are unique to the U.S. litigation system that are not present around the world. But what you are seeing is you're seeing some of these trends pick up. So in particular, third-party litigation, which allows funds to come in, hedge funds or whomever, to really support plaintiffs' attorneys during litigation. You're seeing that pick up worldwide. And so between 2015 and 2019, we had about 2% increase in securities-related litigation in the United States. During that same period, it increased 15% worldwide. And I think Swiss Re recently did a report that looked like about 65% of those worldwide cases were being funded by third-party litigation. And that's not a surprise because we do feel like that's a lot of what is really driving these trends. You're particularly seeing third-party litigation funding rise in Australia. But I suspect you will see that continue to rise throughout because that is really becoming an industry. An industry will look for markets. And I think as the funding continues, you will also see pressure from some of these groups to make what they will call reforms in many litigation systems around the world, which will make them more conducive to the very factors that are giving rise to social inflation.
How important is it that insurers apply more rigorous approaches to understanding their potential liability exposures?
I think it's absolutely critical that they apply these more rigorous approaches because what's happening is these trends are not easy to spot right away. And so it really requires the same kind of data analytics that the organized litigation funders are using to look at cases, to really look at entire books, to really understand what trends are going on around the industry, and to use those in predictive models. But it requires reserving at different levels and really getting into the granular details of what is going on across the industry.
So we touched on obviously on the issue of litigation finance and some of the kind of power that's put behind the plaintiff bar. Would you say that there's now a much greater onus on insurers to bolster the robustness of their defense cases and apply more data-driven arguments in a courtroom, and particularly given the uptick in settlement costs?
Absolutely. I think it's very important to understand what trends are out there and to really be able to get into the granular details of the data and to be able to see how that data and how those trends are shaping particular set of claims or what have you, because what's happening in this volatile business environment is it's shifting. And if you don't know how it's shifting, you cannot adequately respond right away, whether that's reserving levels or the proper or most advantageous defense posture to take. But it's not only the data analytics and looking at it from the macro level, it's also getting in with whether it's predictive analytics or data analytics within particular cases to be able to identify fraud, to be able to understand when something is going to be moving from settlement to litigation, or when you know you have an intransigent claimant that you just need to get it into a special handling situation right away. And so I think what's important to understand is that you're dealing with a very sophisticated industry that is out there, and it requires sophisticated analytics at both the macro and the micro level to really adequately respond to those forces that are out there.
Obviously, we've talked a lot about the drivers behind social inflation, but at Crawford as a firm, how are you working with clients to help them limit the impact of social inflation from a claims perspective?
So, I mean, first, it's just the basics, right? Is we're trying to keep up with all those trends that are going on and understand what they are for the very basic pieces of, making sure there's adequate reserves with respect to cases, not relying on data from 2 years ago, but making sure we have very current data and making that available to all of our clients. But at the same time, we're using those data analytics and predictive analytics to help our clients be able to address at both the macro and the micro level, like we talked about earlier, those claims dynamics that are at play. And importantly, we're watching the industry very closely, both here in the United States and across the world, to be able to identify trends that we see because of the number of claims that we handle, that we can share with our clients and help them deal with this phenomenon, which we see continuing for the foreseeable future.
So thanks for joining us, Joseph, and thanks, Joseph, so much for sharing some of those really great insights and thoughts with us at the Insurer TV today.
Really great to be with you, David, and really great to be in person again. Thanks.